What's going on, guys? It's Cooper Codes, and welcome to the complete SvelteKit 1.0 and TypeScript course. In this video, we are going to be building this fully typed project that allows us to have a bunch of code snippets locally that we can save. For example, we'll have a snippet title, then we can choose a programming language here, and then we can also add in a code snippet. Once we have all these input parameters, we can press create snippet, and it's going to be added to our local state here. This is a fantastic tutorial for learning TypeScript because everything here has types. The inputs here are typed, the components of these little code cards are also typed, and we even have a local writable, so a local store in SvelteKit that has types as well. And that allows us to have things like other properties associated with the code snippets. For example, we can favorite or unfavorite a specific snippet. And of course, we can also delete snippets. And one last thing is if we reload the page here, we're actually doing a mock API request that sets us up with two of these initial code snippets. This allows us to showcase some kind of like backend to front-end type safety as well. So as you guys can see with all that functionality, this is a great tutorial for learning the inner workings of both SvelteKit and TypeScript. If you're looking to use TypeScript when you're developing with SvelteKit, this is the video for you. Let's get started by creating our application. In this video, I'm going to be using a UI toolkit called Skeleton. Skeleton is nice because it does a lot of default styling for us and makes our application look great. We can build a SvelteKit application by saying npm create skeleton-app at latest, and then the name of the application, which I'll just call app. What this command does is it instantly sets up a SvelteKit application with all the skeleton UI stuff already created. So it makes our lives way easier. So now we can just press enter. We can press yes to this, and there's going to be a good amount of steps here to get us set up. First of all, we want to say yes to using TypeScript, so just press enter when it's green like this. I'm going to say yes to ESLint, yes to prettier. I'm going to say no to playwright, and no to vittest. So I'm going to install both code block and pop-ups, and so to make these highlighted, you can press the spacebar and then the spacebar here. Once they're both green, you can then press enter, and I'm also going to press the spacebar on all these different Tailwind plugins. I'm going to choose the Crimson theme, but you guys can choose whatever theme you want, but I think Crimson looks the best. So I'm going to go to the Crimson here and press enter. And then I'm going to choose the bare bones application template. Then it's going to install the application. All right, so that might take a second for you guys. It took a second for me for some reason. We can then go into the app directory by saying cd app. And then we can see what our application currently looks like by saying npm run dev. It's very bare bones as it told us. And so now let's go in and create a default layout for our application. We can open up the app folder over here, and I know it's a lot of code here, but the majority of the logic for this video is going to be inside the source folder, so just pay attention to that part. In the source folder, we have the routes folder. Routing in SvelteKit is folder based, and so the first files inside of this route are going to be serving localhost, just the base route right here, for example. And so we can look at the page.svelte, which is just this very simple container, and we can also look at the layout.svelte. Let's get started by building a basic layout for our page. Because we're using Skeleton UI for our application here, we're given access to a handful of things that make this initial user interface really simple. And so we are going to import a couple things from Skeleton UI. I'm going to import the app bar and then the app shell from @skeletonlabs/skeleton. And so inside this layout, the slot is where our page is going to go. And so we're going to make a very simple layout here where you have the app shell. This allows us to contain our entire application. So we're going to make sure to put the slot inside of there. And then the app bar is just like a nav bar, for example. So inside of our nav bar, we can just do a simple h3 called code share is what I'm going to call this website. I'm also going to give it a class of text-left. This comes from Tailwind CSS and allows us to left align the text to our navbar. This is recommended in the documentation, but I'm going to do a svelte fragment for the header slot. So I'm going to say slot is equal to header, and we can wrap this around our entire app bar. And so that's all we need for the layout. You can imagine we have an entire app shell, we have a navbar at the top, and then this slot is where all of our page data is going to go. And so if we go back to our website, we can see the navbar is here, which is great news. And we have this very simple, let's get cracking bones, which we're going to change into our new components. So we can go over to plus page.svelte. This is the route file showing the page for this specific route in our SvelteKit application. I'm going to make a relatively simple one grid layout for our application. So we can delete everything here as they kind of mention. And let's get started creating our one grid layout. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a div This div is going to wrap everything, and it's going to be a class of flex. This allows us to justify everything to the center of a page. So we can use the justify center property from flex, and so it keeps things aligned to the middle of the page. We can then create another div, which is going to be our very simple grid. So it's just going to be one single column. So we can make it a class B of grid initially from Tailwind. Then we can say grid-calls-1. So make it a one column per row grid is how you can view that. I'm going to give a gap of 4 for some styling around our grid components, a minimum width of full, but when we go to a medium screen, I want the minimum width to be 750 pixels. I'm then going to have an initial header, so an h3 here with the class of text-center. And then py-6. So there's going to be padding in the y direction for this header, and we're going to create a code snippet because we're going to have that little like input box right under this. And so I'm actually going to have the screen like this so we can see the styling as I build it and then the output on the right. So now we can make a div that has all the different inputs that we're going to have when we want to create a code snippet. So this div is going to look like this, and we are going to use a class equal to card, which is going to give it some nice like card styling. We're going to give it a p-4, so some general padding, a width of full, a text-token, and then a space-y-4. When we build our inputs, they're all going to have a very similar structure. I'm going to initially have a label here, which is going to be class is equal to label, which gives it some styling to be a label. And then a span here, which is a snippet title, so the name of our input, because the span is going to be right above the actual input. So now we can say input class is equal to input, then its type is going to be equal to text, so a text input, and now we can also have a placeholder, which is going to be equal to enter title here ... and we can close off that input here. And boom, as you guys can see, a nice simple text input. And so to make things simple, we can copy over what we just made with that label, make another one, but instead this is going to be for our programming language, and instead of an input, we can just boom, delete that input. We are going to have a select. So we can say class is equal to select. So a select kind of gives us a drop down in some default styling, and inside of the select, we can have all the different options. So to create an option for HTML, we can say option value is equal to HTML, and then HTML right here. And now you can see we have a drop down with just one HTML. And so we can do two other options here. I'm going to have CSS and then also TypeScript. And so we can change the value to CSS here and also the value to TypeScript here. And so again, let's copy that first label here, bring it down. This is instead going to be where the person pastes their code. So I'm just going to say the actual code snippet itself. And so now we can do a text area because it's going to be multi-line text. So you can do that by saying text area like this, give it a class of text area. I'm going to give it 4 rows initially like this. Then I'm going to have its placeholder be equal to enter your snippet code here, ... And then I'm just going to close off the text area. And so there we go. We have our initial code snippet. And so I can show you guys like this here. It also stays at a smaller size when you make the screen larger. So pretty cool. I'm then going to make a very simple div here that's going to hold our h2 for my code snippets. As you'll see, nothing's here yet. I kind of like how everything looks just aligned. So I'm going to say class is equal to text-center and then py-6, giving it some padding. All right, so now we actually need that card that's going to show our code snippet data. So I'm going to make the code snippet cards their own Svelte components. So we can go back into our file browser here. At the top level of our source folder, I'm going to create a code snippet card.svelte. So for now, I'm not going to worry about any typing or properties. We're going to get into that later in the video. I'm just going to make a simple card for us to use. So firstly, I'm going to say div class is equal to card, giving it that card styling like we saw with the inputs. It's then going to have a header, which is going to be class is equal to card-header. It's then going to have our title of snippet. This is eventually going to be a property, but don't worry about that for now. And we're also going to have a simple div class is equal to float-right. This allows us to have some buttons that just go to the right of the text. So for example, the first button is going to be favorite, and this favorite button is going to be a type of button, and its class is going to be equal to button-small, then variant-filled-secondary. And so filled is the variant and the secondary is the color. We can copy this button again, put it in here, And this one's just going to say X because it's going to be like a delete button. And so now we can say variant-filled-error to make it, look all red so we can press it to delete. So under our header, we are going to have a section for our card, which is going to have a class of p-4. And now we want to use something called the code block. So at the top of this Svelte component, we can add in a script specifically with TypeScript by saying lang is equal to ts like this. And we can say import code block from skeleton lab/skeleton. This code block component is incredibly important because it allows us to have some really cool styling and show off code in our application. We can add it to our application by just saying code block like this. And it's looking for a language. So I'm just going to say HTML is going to be the default language. And the code is going to be equal to, we can just write some HTML code real quick. So h1, hello, it's Cooper codes /h1. And again, guys, these will eventually be variables. So we can go back over to our routes folder and go into plus page.svelte. At the top of our page, we can make another script. So we can say script lang is equal to ts. And now because we want to use this component within our page, we can then import the component by saying import code snippet card from its location. And so now we can add in code snippets here by just using the component. So we can say code snippet card like this. And right now it has no properties, which is completely fine. And so if we go over to our code snippets here, we're going to see, okay, hello, it's Cooper codes. So it's kind of cool it's showing up. One thing we need to do is we need to turn on the highlighting for the actual code itself. We can do that by going over to our plus layout.svelte, importing this function called store highlight.js. And then we're going to have to go into our console and then say npm install highlight.js. This allows us to get code highlighting in our SvelteKit application. And so now we can import the highlighter by saying import hljs from highlight.js. We then want the skeleton UI to be aware of this highlighter by saying store highlight.js.set then hljs like this. This means that if we ever use a code block component, it's going to be using the highlighting that is determined right here. We can then also import the specific CSS of a specific kind of code highlighter that we like, or a code theme. For example, we can say import highlight.js/styles/github-dark.css. And so now we can reload our application here, and you'll see we actually have, it's a pretty bare bones piece of HTML, but we actually have some highlighting that's going on here, which is great news. All right, so we've now built the underlying user interface we're going to use throughout this tutorial. Let's get started by using TypeScript to type the inputs that we have right here. So we can go into our plus page.svelte, and we can see all of our different inputs here. So our inputs have a title, which is a text input, a programming language, which is eventually going to be a string, and then a code snippet, which is also going to be a string. So we can go into a very special folder here called app.d.ts. This stores all the different types of your Svelte application. And so if we create a type here, it is recognized throughout our entire application, which is a super important point. So if we ever want to type something, what you can do is you can go over to this file and then make an interface. So like a class in TypeScript of the type you want to make. For example, I'm going to say interface is going to be code snippet input. This is so we can make an object that has all the different inputs that we want. So we can send it over to our backend or send it to where we create something. So we have a title in our input, which is going to be a string. We have a language, so the actual coding language, which is going to be a string. Then we have the code itself, which is going to be a string as well. And so although this is a bunch of strings in our inputs, if you had a number, if you had a, even a different object type, for example, you can type it right here. So let's go back to our page.svelte and use this code snippet input to create an object for all of our different inputs. So we can go to the top here and say, let form data, for example, be typed to code snippet input. And so if we leave it just like this, it's actually going to give us an error because this variable is expecting all the different properties from the code snippet input type. And so if you guys want to cheat a little bit, you can go over to your app.d.ts. You can copy these three properties and then paste them in here. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to give us a place to start. So title should be an empty string. Code is going to be an empty string initially. And for this select thing specifically, I'm going to set the default value equal to whatever's going to be selected by default. In our case, it's going to always be the top value, so we can go up and set that equal to HTML. And boom, now we have a form data that's typed specifically to our input. And so I'm just going to leave a comment here for kind of learning. If we ever make something like a create snippet, which we are going to make in this video, we can have the parameters, for example, the input parameter, be typed to code snippet input as well. And so that's really powerful because it allows us to have the same type in this component and also that same type showing up in the other area of our application. And so, for example, if we ever wanted to add more things to our input, it would also add more things to how it's treated in the other snippet. And we're actually going to do this in this tutorial, so look forward to that. So SvelteKit is pretty interesting for one reason. We can use the bind property on all of our different inputs by saying bind and then the value. So we can bind the value of a certain input to a certain property. For example, we can say form data dot title. So whatever the input of this type equals text here that has our title, it's going to be bound to the form data dot title. So if this input ever changes, that means that this property right here is also going to change. And that's going to be true for all of our different inputs. So we can even copy this bind value right here, bring it over to our select, for example, and we can instead say dot language here. And then we even have this text area down here. We can say form data dot code. And so that's pretty cool. That means that we can sync up all of our different values here to one kind of central object that is typed, which is pretty interesting. All right, guys, so now the tutorial is going to get a little bit interesting. So I'm going to make some comments here to kind of show you guys what to expect next. First things first, we are going to make a snippet store, which is going to be a local writable that allows us to store code snippets. We are then going to add the ability to create/delete snippets. And then we're also going to be able to favorite snippets. And then finally, super interesting, we are going to make a plus page.ts to initially load in some example snippets. So it's kind of like mocking a database request. And so this snippet store right here is super important. We can get started by creating the local store by going into our source folder and then make a file called snippetstore.ts. So anywhere in our SvelteKit application, we can make TypeScript files just to house certain logic. For example, we're going to have logic here that I'm going to comment out real quick. We are going to have a snippet store, which allows us to store code snippets. And so you'll see a code snippet is going to have 4 different properties: a title, the code itself, the language of the code, and then also if it's been favorited or not. So I'm just going to call that favorite. We are going to have the ability to add a snippet, delete a snippet, and then toggle if the snippet is favorited or not. And that's the basic idea of the logic here. And so I say all that firstly because look at this. This code snippet here is probably something we could turn into a type. And we wanted to have these 4 things: the title, the language, and if it's favorited or not. So we can go into our app.d.ts and make an interface under our snippet input here. And we can say interface, code, snippet. We can cheat a little bit by copying all these different things and then adding on the favorite is a Boolean. So I kind of made this 4th property to have something that wasn't just a bunch of strings, but it also adds some cool functionality to your project. And it shows you that just because this code snippet input and this code snippet are similar does not mean that they are the same thing. You could imagine if your interface code snippet is coming from a database, you might have things stored in there like, this is just for example, we're not going to do this in this tutorial, but the user who created it might be a user type, might have a created on, which might be a date type or something along those lines. Or usually just store date to strings, but This is just giving you guys an example of how this code snippet is different than how we do typing to inputs, for example. All right, but now we have our code snippet created, so we can go back over to our snippet store. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to import a writable from Svelte store. So this writable store is how we can make a kind of like local state, if you were to think from like a React background, of a specific type. And we're also going to get access to the get here, which allows us to get the value of a store. And so this snippet store, we can say export const, which means the rest of our application can get access to it, is what that export means. And we can make the name of our store called snippet store like this is going to be equal to a writable. And so we can just do a writable of an empty array like this, but this is an example of not using TypeScript. If we want to use TypeScript, we can use our little code snippet type that we just made. We can say inside of like HTML brackets here, code snippet like this, and then we want to make it an array of code snippets. Boom, there you go. This allows our writable to have logic that's like code snippet 1, code snippet 2, along those lines, right? And it's important because that means that every single item in this array has to be typed to a code snippet. You can't randomly delete stuff. You can't like clear it out, you know? That's the big essence of TypeScript is as we, add snippets or delete snippets or toggle favorite, they still have to adhere to the code snippet type at the end of the day, or else it's going to give us errors. And so now we can make functions to adjust our writable or add things or delete things to our writable. So we can say export function add snippet, and it's going to have an input. This input is going to be in a little add snippet button in our front end. And what can we get access to in our front end? Let's go look at plus page.svelte. We can get access to this form data, which is of code snippet input type. So what can we do over here? Make the input be code snippet input. Yeah, I know. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. And so now if we say input dot, we can actually get access to the properties that are from our front end in kind of different logic, and so in order to get the current array of what our snippets looks like, for example, like this, we can say let snippets be equal to get snippet store, which gives us access to the value of our snippet store. If you guys are unfamiliar with writables, the main concept here is that a writable is this big kind of overarching object that kind of manages your data. It is not the data itself is the huge important point. If you want to get the data of a store, you have to use the get function here and do snippet store like this. I will mention for the TypeScript nerds who are about to yell at me for this, you can do other things, which we're going to do in this tutorial, like $snippet store. This is going to listen to changes to the value of snippet store. And so now we want to update the value of the store itself. We can do that by saying snippet store.update. This is going to have a callback function, which is expecting a new code snippet array. So I'm just going to put this here, a new code snippet array to replace it. And you'll even see in the error here, void is not assignable to type code snippet array. So we are going to give it a new array with our new code snippet input here. So I'm going to say return a new array. This new array is going to contain all these snippets so far. So ... snippets. This is called the spread operator if you guys want to look that up, but it's pretty much taking all the different objects right here, for example, and adding them to the end of this array that we just made. In the front of the array, which is going to be at the top of our website, we can add in our new code snippet. And we are learning a lot about the spread operator today because we're going to say ... input. This ... input is a code snippet input, right? And we know if we look at our types, code snippet input has title, language, and code. And so when we do ... code snippet input, it's going to put the title, language, and code. And so the last property we need to add to our newly created object is this favorite right here. So we can go in here and set the favorite equal to false initially. And so that's a super simple way of just adding a new object from input data and then adding all of our old objects to the end of it as well. And so that's all we need to do for adding snippets. All right, so now we can take a look at how do we delete snippets. Well, we can say export function delete snippet, and this time it's going to take an index that we want to delete. So an index is going to be of what type? It's going to be number. It's going to be like 0, 1, 2, something along those lines, right? I mainly just decided to delete by index to make this tutorial simple. If you have a database, for example, you might want to delete by ID is a better choice. But because we're just using a local store here, I'm going to delete by index. And so similar thing here, we can copy this let snippets from above, paste it in, and we can even copy this snippet store.update. But the return statement is going to be way more simple. It's just going to be snippets. That's it. Because you could imagine when we delete something, we are just going to do a very simple array delete in JavaScript, or TypeScript in this case. So we can just say snippets.splice. This is going to adjust the actual value of snippets. So we don't even have to say new snippets is equal to. Nope, don't have to do that. And we can just say go to a certain index and then chop 1 off from there. Is this very common way to delete something from an array in JavaScript. And I'm kind of using JavaScript and TypeScript interchangeably there because, TypeScript is just JavaScript with types. But this removes one item from index, if that makes sense. So if the index number was 0, 1, or 2, so maybe index 2. And so there you go, a very simple adding and deleting to our store. And so I really like that we have this toggle favorite because it allows us to do something that isn't as simple as up here. So we can go down here, paste the code in, and I'm just going to say toggle favorite. And so I'm just modifying this code that we got from above. We don't want to do the splicing, so make sure to delete that, or else you're going to start seeing random stuff get deleted. And inside of this updater, we are going to do something that's very kind of common JavaScript logic, where we are going to return a snippets.map. This means we are going to go through every single value in an array and then return something based off that value. And so let me explain that. Inside of here, we're going to have a snippet, and then a snippet index is where we get access to when we use map. And so you can imagine if we have an array, for example, and at its most basic form, we just have a bunch of objects with a favorite property, which is going to be true, or a favorite property, which is going to be false. And you can imagine we have all the other data in here too, but just for basic example, just only favorite for now. If we wanted to kind of like favorite this second thing, what would happen? Well, the second thing in the array is going to be of index 1. And so when we map over our array here, going from one item to the next item, just going through them like that, we're eventually going to say if the snippet index is equal to the index that is from up here. So up here is actually where our one's going to come from. It's the index that we want to favorite or unfavorite. And so when these two indexes are equal, we are at the object we want to toggle favorite. So we can return an object like this, where it's going to have all the properties of the snippet that we're currently at. So it's going to have the same title, same code, same everything, right? That's what ... snippet does. It gives all those different properties. And then we want to make the favorite property be equal to the opposite. So we can say opposite with an exclamation point, snippet, the current snippet we're at, and then dot favorite. And you'll see it's actually showing the dot favorite kind of autocomplete because snippet here is typed to a code snippet. Pretty cool. And so if it's false, it's going to become true. And if it's true, it's going to become false. And so if the snippet that we're on isn't the snippet that we want to toggle favorite, we can just return all of that snippet's data. So return snippet like this, because this is a very basic way of looking at it. But this snippets.map is slowly building up an array of different objects, right? We have the first object, we have the second object, we have the third object. It's going to keep building it up like that. Eventually, it's going to find an object that's different. For example, it reaches this if case. And so then we are going to add in the changed object. And then at the end of the day, map's going to create something like this. This is obviously like pseudocode, right? But this change object is going to be favorited or unfavorited. And then this array is going to get sent to the snippet store and updated. That's why this return statement right here is so important. It's saying return this entire thing, which is going to build an array like this. It's kind of how you should think about it. All right, guys, pat yourself on the back. This store stuff is not simple, but if you kind of stayed with me along the whole way, you guys are honestly ready to be working with stores yourselves. So hopefully this is a great introduction. And something that was subtle happening during this whole store part is everything here is typed. This snippet here is a code snippet. This snippet index here is a number. We can even look at this favorite, and it knows that this favorite is a code snippet.favorite. So everything here is typed, including snippets knows is a code snippet array. And so just to clarify this, I've said this before in the tutorial, so if you're like, I already heard you, bro, sorry. But these exports throughout this entire file are incredibly important because that means that anywhere inside of our SvelteKit application, we can grab these things. And I'm talking about that again because we're about to do just that. So we are going to go over to our plus page.svelte and we can initially set a value of our snippet store. So we can say snippet store. It auto-completed that, but you can go and import things from your snippet store like this at line 3. And then we can get access to the dot set of the writable. We can set its value. So initially, I'm going to set the snippet store equal to an array that I'm just going to make right here. This is eventually going to be data from an API call, but we're going to get into that in a second. So we can make an array. It's going to have one object. And guys, what do we know about this object? It has to be a code snippet. So I'm just going to say title is equal to Cooper codes snippet. You can say your own name if you want. Language is going to be HTML. The code property is going to be equal to a div. I'm going to say this is a div. I know I'm pretty creative. And then its favorite property is going to be equal to false initially. And then boom, once you're the right type, the errors go away. And then we're going to do some cool stuff here, okay? This is like crazy TypeScript for if you're just starting with this. But we can scroll down here and you see where it has code snippet card right here. We can then make an each loop. So we can say for each thing inside of our, here's the crazy part, $snippet store. This is giving us access to the value of the snippet store, and it's also listening to the value of the snippet store. So if we ever add anything or remove anything, it's going to re-render and show different code snippet cards. And so from this snippet store, we can get access to the snippet itself, so as snippet, and also get access to the index we're currently on. And we can end our each statement by going down here and saying /each. And so we should expect to have one thing inside of our snippet store. And so it's going to show only one code card. I'll make a comment here. We need properties. So we're gonna do that in a second, but let's go look at our application and see this running. All right, pretty sick. You'll see we have one code snippet, and just to test things out, we can go up here, copy this object and make two different objects. And so now we would expect to see two different cards. All right, guys, things are working, and look at that. We can even scroll a little bit. Now, one thing we want to do is we want to look at how do we do properties inside of TypeScript. And so boom, we're going to get started on properties right here. And so now we're going to look into SvelteKit properties and how they work with TypeScript. We are going to add in some properties to the code snippet card that allows us to get the code snippet data and make it typed data as well. So I think one of the best ways to teach this is to get a bunch of errors and then fix a bunch of errors. So what we can do is we can say snippet property is equal to the code snippet that we're looping through. And so remember, the snippet store is an array of code snippets. And so this snippet right here is a code snippet, which is pretty cool. Then we also want the index of where it is in the array. And so we're going to make an index property be equal to index. And so now we got a bunch of errors. We can fix these errors by creating some properties in our code snippet card component. So let's go and do that. So we can go over to code snippet card right here, and we can say export let snippet be equal to code snippet like this. This means that we are creating a property called snippet and we want it to be typed to code snippet. If we try to set it equal to an empty object, what's going to happen? You're going to get messed up. We can also set some default values to this code snippet just to kind of like protect ourselves in our code. So we can just do a bunch of regular values like title is equal to an empty string, language, an empty string, code is equal to an empty string, and then favorite is equal to an empty string. Just kidding. Favorite should not be equal to an empty string. Remember, favorite is a Boolean, so it should be equal to false. It's going to give us this weird yellow error because we never use this property. So it's like, why do you have a unused property? But we are going to use it in a second, so just ignore those for now. And we can go back and look at our plus page.svelte. We'll see we also have the index here, which is a number. So we can go back to the code component and say export let index is going to be equal to a number. Pretty cool. There you go. And so now something really interesting gets to happen is we can go to our text that we hard coded down here and start to fill it up with values that are legitimate. For example, we can say snippet.title, saying, okay, we have the snippet here. We're going to use the title. This is some cool little shorthand syntax, but because favorite is a true or a false, we can do a little block here and say snippet.favorite and do a ternary statement. So we can do question mark. If it is favorited, we're going to show them the unfavorite because they're going to have the option to unfavorite it. If it is not favorited, we're going to be like, here is the option to favorite it. So that's like the logic there. If you also want, you can like make it change colors by changing this class here by doing the same thing, giving it different classes based on if it's favorited or not. But I'm just keeping this tutorial simple. And we can also make the language down here be equal to the snippet.language, and the code is going to be equal to the snippet.code. So boom, we are chilling. Now we have a fully typed component, which is pretty legit. So let's go back to our application and see this working. So as you guys saw before, my objects for the two code snippets I put in are completely identical, but they're actually looking at the object itself, which is really great news. Now we can actually add in some functionality from our snippet store by allowing us to delete snippets and favorite snippets. So let's go check that out. So we can go to the top of our code snippet card and import logic from our snippet store. For example, delete snippet and also toggle favorite. It might seem like magic to you guys, but what we can do is we can trigger the functionality of our snippet stores by having the on click event on our buttons, then have an arrow function which points to the logic of our snippet store, where you're going to say toggle favorite. And so we can look at toggle favorite and say, what is it expecting? It's expecting an index, which is a number. So we can toss in the index that we have access to our properties here that's also typed as a number. I know the TypeScript stuff is pretty cool. And so now for this button, this like the red X to delete it, we can say on click, same exact thing, pass the arrow function, and instead point it to the delete snippet. And what is delete snippet expecting? The index number. So boom, there we go. So now in our application, we should be able to toggle the favorite and also delete snippets. Let's go check it out. All right, make sure to refresh your application. We can say favorite and unfavorite, which is great news. And then boom, we can also delete snippets. Okay, so something that I'm going to do now is that we have these code snippets here that are just manually loaded in through an array. But I'm going to make a call in our page.ts that's kind of going to simulate if you wanted to get code snippets from a backend. So just to clarify, we can go over to +page.svelte, scroll to the top, and you'll see we have a snippet store right here. And so we can get this data right here specifically from an external source by using +page.ts. So let's go over to our routes and make that +page.ts file. This is going to give us access to a very important type. We can say import type of page load, and that's going to be from $$types, which are pretty much a bunch of generic SvelteKit types for us to use. We can then make a load function. So when our page loads, for example, we want to get new data. We are going to say export const load, and it has to be called load just so you guys know. And that's going to be equal to a function that we can return data with. This load function is going to do something called satisfies page load. And so why do we have to say satisfies page load? It's because page load is going to pass in this load data into our page data, which is something that we can get access to later. And that page data is going to be in our front end. The load itself is going to be pretty simple. We're just going to return an object, and inside this object, we can have a bunch of different loaded data. I'm just going to have a snippets property, which is going to be equal to an array. And so we can go back over to our page.svelte and then grab the objects from over here and then paste them in here. And just to make the website look cooler, I'm going to say cool code snippet is going to be the other one. And I'm going to make it a language of TypeScript. And I'm going to say console.log subscribe. So that's like a virus or something. You shouldn't run that, but if you want to subscribe to my channel, feel free to. And so a huge emphasis of this part of the tutorial is that you can get this data from any source. So you can do a fetch call here to fetch data. You could do a GraphQL client. You could just, you could just manually change this object here whenever you want. That is an option. And so I'm just showing you guys that this is hard coded, but it doesn't have to be. And so if we go over to our page.svelte, how we get access to the data that this page.ts is giving us is we can say export let data be equal to the type of page data, which is going to import it here if it didn't automatically. And so now we can see data dot, and it's showing data.snippets, which is pretty crazy. We have code that can run on the server or do API calls on the client that is still typed. And it's giving us access to these snippets here. Instead of setting a snippet store equal to this huge array, we can set it equal to the data from our backend by going in here and just pasting in the data.snippets. And we can just make that one line. It's pretty simple. And so now if we run our application again, we're going to see it's actually getting that data from our +page.ts. Pretty legit. And so now we can add a button to our create code snippet that's going to allow us to add a new code snippet to our store here. And so this is where everything kind of comes into place. So let's check it out. So we can make a button after all those different labels and say button type is equal to button, and then we'll give it some classes by saying class is equal to btn, btn-small, and then a variant -filled -primary. And I'm just going to have it say create snippet. And then when we do an on click of this specific snippet, what do we want to have happen? Well, we wanted to call the add snippet code. And so we can go to the top of our code here. And from the snippet store, we also want to get access to add snippet, because if we go to snippet store, we can see it's going to call this add snippet code right here. And so let's scroll back down and make the onClick point to add snippet. And what is it expecting? It's expecting an input that is typed to CodeSnippetInput. I wonder where we have an input that's typed to CodeSnippetInput. Let's check. Right here, we have the form data, which is typed to CodeSnippetInput. So we can copy this, bring it down, and paste it in here, and we're good to go. All right, guys, this is the kind of like finale here. So let's go and add this snippet. I'm going to select TypeScript. I'm going to say snippet store.ts example. And guys, I'm the most shameless developer you've ever seen. To get some TypeScript code, I'm just going to copy all the code here. And then I'm just going to paste it into the code snippet like this. And so boom, now we can see that when we add the code snippet, it's going to be shown inside of our code right here. And so guys, this is no joke when it comes to how much you guys have learned about SvelteKit and TypeScript in this video. So thank you so much for watching. I genuinely appreciate it. And I kind of found it difficult to understand how the different types typings work together in SvelteKit, so hopefully this video helped you. This video is just an introduction to what you can do with SvelteKit. There are some things I didn't cover in this video. For example, the store doesn't get saved to local storage, for example, so if we ever refresh the page, all of our progress is gone. And I kind of made that decision not to use the local storage because I wanted to show you guys how you can load in this data from like an API call, for example. Alright guys, hopefully this project was a bunch of fun to make, and again, thank you for watching.